call this meeting to order. This is meeting number 20 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. We're here today to consider the supplementary estimates for 2020-2021 and the main estimates. So the clerk has distributed the subs to the committee on February 18th and the mains on February 26th. So now we want to welcome the Honourable Miriam Monseft, Minister for Women and Gender Equality, as well as the senior officials from the Department for Women and Gender Equality. We have Madame Roy, as we said, and Nancy Gardner, and Lisa Smiley. So we're glad to have you, and Minister, we'll give you 5 minutes to make your opening remarks, and then we'll go into our questions. Hello, Alice. We'll test you later when you're asking your questions. The Minister's going to begin for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Hello, colleagues. Bonjour, Anin, salam alaikum. I hope you're safe. I hope you're well, and I wish the same for your loved ones. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today, to thank you for all your important work, to speak with you about the progress that we all must work together to protect, about the path ahead, about the supplementary estimates, of course, and how we can work together to ensure that all women are able to benefit from the prosperity of this country, and those hardest hit by COVID are able to land on their feet. Let me first, though, acknowledge that a year ago on this day, with the pandemic being declared, our lives changed forever. Women ended up taking the majority of the responsibilities for care for their loved ones in their chosen professions on the front lines of the fight against COVID. Women experience higher rates of gender-based violence with their kids at home, and the elders they care for, increases in unpaid care responsibilities, where a reality for far too many. And women lost jobs faster than men, and those jobs are returning at a lower pace than men. And without women in our economies and in our communities, Canada will not be able to achieve its full potential. I would like to thank the entire public service. Oh, I'm hearing my echo, Madam Chair. Let me just fix that. I'd like to thank the Government of Canada public service employees for all the ways you've had to pivot, to our interpreters who ensure we're heard across official languages, and to your families for sharing you and for having to live with you as you take care of all other Canadians in this very difficult time. My own team members, Guylaine Roy, Associate Deputy Minister Nancy Gardner, and the amazing, wears many hats, Lisa Smiley, have been instrumental in moving us forward in key areas, like ensuring that some 1,500 plus organizations receive funds directly in their bank accounts in the early days of COVID to make sure that they kept their doors open, they stayed safe, and offered a place of refuge for women, non-binary folks, and children in their hour of need. My team also ensured that despite COVID, we were able to gather provincial and territorial ministers responsible for the status of women and get historic agreement to move forward with Canada's first national action plan on gender-based violence. The very same team, just a couple of days ago, hosted a 2-day virtual summit that convened thousands of feminists from across the country so that their voices, the experts, and their lived experiences would shape the decisions that the federal government would be making. This is the same team that is going to be deploying through the 21-22 main estimates, the $125.5 million to support through grants and contributions capacity building of women's organizations, LGBTQ2 organizations, as well as supporting the national strategy to combat human trafficking and ensuring survivors have what they need. We have made progress, Madam Chair. We stood in the House of Commons not too long ago commemorating the 50th year of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women report being tabled. We now apply an intersectional gendered lens to all our decisions, including the upcoming budget and our COVID response. There are 100 women in the House of Commons. Senate is at parity. There are more women at the table now than ever before, and our voices matter. Our voices count. We're collecting gender disaggregated data. Tens of thousands of women have received support through the National Housing Strategy and have a safe and affordable roof over their heads. We've cut child poverty by some 40% through the child benefit, and the Canada Child Benefit has received additional supports for families directly into their bank accounts in this very difficult year that has been the pandemic. We've also got a women entrepreneurship strategy, the first of its kind, scaling up and supporting women entrepreneurs, and we need them on our main menu, employing others and contributing to vibrancies of their communities and our country. The Universal Broadband Fund is not only going to connect every single household to high-speed internet, but it's also addressing the cell gaps that create too many highways of tears in too many corners of this great country and putting at risk too many of our daughters, including, as we heard in the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls testimonies and in the report. We've got women like you.
Sorry, that's your time, Minister. We'll catch the rest on the questions, though. We're going to start out.
I thought I had 1 more minute, but that's okay.
No, we're going to start out with Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes. Go for it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I concur with the Minister that with the significance of this day, and I want to thank all the women across this country for doing what you did for the last year and standing up with your family, taking care of your family, taking care of your neighbors. Thank you. Madam Chair, before I proceed to my question for the Minister, I would like to bring to the committee members' attention the following motion, which I intend to move during committee business. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of sexual misconduct within the Canadian Armed Forces, including a review of Operation Honor. That the evidence and documentation received by the committee during the first session of the 42nd Parliament in the report titled A Force for Change, Creating a Culture of Equality for Women in the Canadian Armed Forces be taken into consideration by the committee in the current session. That the following witnesses be invited to appear before the committee: the Chief of Defence Staff, the Minister of Defence, the Canadian Forces Ombudsman, Lieutenant General Francis Allen, the Vice Chief of Defence Staff, the Commander of the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, retired Supreme Court Justice Marie Deschamps, it's just 700, Don Knott, and retired Master Corporal Stephanie Raymond. And now to my question for the Minister. Minister, are you familiar with your mandate letter from the Prime Minister dated December 13, 2019?
Yes.
Okay. Minister, on paragraph 11 of the letter, it says, and I quote, "We're committed to evidence-based decision-making that takes into consideration the impacts of policies on all Canadians and fully defend the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom. You will apply gender-based analysis plus in the decisions that you make." End quote. Then on paragraph 15, bullet point 2, it says, and I quote, "Work to ensure that rigorous gender-based analysis plus is performed on all cabinet proposals from every department." Minister, recently it has been reported that 2 individuals, one isolating at a government hotel and the other at home, were assaulted, one sexually by a quarantine screening officer. Minister, given your requirement by the Prime Minister to ensure all policies undergo a GBA+, did you at any time highlight how these policies may fail in keeping women protected? And if so, how did the Prime Minister and Cabinet respond?
Thank you for that very important question, MP Sahota. As a sister, as an aunt, and as a woman, and of course as the minister responsible for the well-being of women, when those reports of sexual assault came up, I was as outraged and as disappointed as you all were. I can assure you that we are looking in the matter and that the investigation that is ongoing, we will get to the bottom of it.
But Minister, that's not my question. My question is, Did you at any time highlight how these policies make
Point of order, Madam Chair. We cannot hear Minister's answer. I don't know. Everyone has a trouble to hearing Minister.
Is it volume related?
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that they can adjust in the room, perhaps, according to the clerk. Very good. Sorry to interrupt.
Is this better, Madam Chair? MP Sido, is this better?
Yes.
Yes. Now
some
it's
of
good.
you are shaking your heads and some of you are saying yes.
It's better now.
Okay,
Go for
perfect.
it. I'll add the time.
And we do apply an intersectional gendered lens to every decision so that we can better understand the impact of the decisions we're making and then to mitigate for them. In fact, our intersectional gendered lens applied to the entirety of our COVID response has been recognized internationally as being the best. We still, every single day, work to improve that process. And if this committee has any ideas on how we can sharpen GBA Plus, Madam Chair, I am all ears.
Minister, on July 7th, Minister Qualtrough appeared before the committee and she said, I believe you were there as well, and she said you did not apply GBA Plus analysis to all the programs and policies. Are you now starting to apply it?
Madam Chair, we've applied a GBA Plus to our entire COVID response. I was here for that committee meeting, and Minister Qualtrough was referring to the CERB, which we rolled out within a matter of days, and we weren't able to do the formal GBA Plus on that particular measure right away, but you can be sure, Madam Chair, that we did so as soon as it was feasible. Our first priority was to get the money into people's bank accounts so that they could follow public health orders and stay safe and not worry about putting food on the table and putting a roof over their heads. I think we can all agree that poverty is sexist and CERB would have helped disproportionately women.
I'm going to move on to the next question since
Sure.
you're not really answering my first question. You have a mandate from this Prime Minister and to Canadians that you will ensure that all cabinet proposals will undergo a GBA Plus. Canadian women are fed up of this government, continue talk and no action. And because of your inaction, you placed these two women in harm's way because you did not do your job. Minister, today we are reviewing your estimates for your department. Why should we approve them when you consistently fail Canadian women?
Well, Madam Chair, I disagree entirely with the premise of that question. While it is true that gender-based violence is far too prevalent in this country, no government has done more than our government to provide supports to frontlines, to acknowledge it in legislation, and to support particularly racialized and Indigenous community organizations in their efforts to prevent and address it. If my honorable colleague wants to vote against funding for human trafficking supports or LGBTQ2 organizations or women who are working on the front lines of the shadow pandemic,
sorry, that's your time.
Choice.
Now we're going to go on to Monsieur Sarré pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Madam Minister, for your testimony and for all the work you've done across the country to support women and women's organizations, especially in these very difficult pandemic times. So again, a big thank you as well to all the organizations and the people, the volunteers, supporting women's organizations. For instance, in my riding, we have the Horizon Center and other women's centers in Sudbury. They all said they appreciate the funding they've received, the additional funding they received to fight COVID. I would also like to thank you for the work you've done in the regions.
So Judy Arola, who was the first women's minister in 81. And at the time, there were only 4 female MPs at the time. So my question, Madam Minister, is regarding the Feminist Fund for Response. What is the difference between that fund and the fund that we would have with calls for offers, for example? Thank you, Mr. Sarré, for your leadership and for your hard work
been a difficult time for you and your team, and despite those challenges, you've helped your community get connected to high-speed internet, and here you are championing women and gender equality. The $100 million Feminist Response and Recovery Fund, which we continue to encourage applications for, is different from previous funds in that it focuses particularly on those populations that are underserved, underrepresented, and hardest hit by COVID. Black, Indigenous, racialized, LGBTQ2, rural, young, seniors. We know that these particular groups, as well as LGBTQ2 Canadians, have been hardest hit by COVID. This fund is also very flexible in that unless you're a private entity, you qualify for funding. The idea here is if you have a solution to ensure the health and safety of women and non-binary folks, if you have a solution to help improve the workforce participation of women in this pandemic and moving forward, and if you have ways that you can increase the representation of diverse women's voices around decision-making tables, we want to work with you and we encourage you to apply. Applications are open until the 24th of March.
No, thank you, Madam Minister, and I appreciate, and I'm hearing it from local organizations, the flexibility we have now with a lot of these different programs, and they're able to apply, and also working closely with the province, in our case in Ontario, has been a blessing to a lot of the local organizations. So thank you for your leadership to engaging all levels of government on that. And also, I wanted to ask, Madam Minister, because you have a dual role, not only as the women of gender equality, but also on the rural economic development, which is a really interesting and appropriate link to your testimony today. And also, we have a study on rural, the effect on rural on women in rural areas. So I wanted to, we heard a lot by witnesses about the challenges of the internet, the challenges of the social services and the link to making sure that we keep women safe in rural Canada. So I wanted to get the opportunity for you to explain a bit more about our new program that we've launched, historic funding never been given by a federal government for a universal broadband fund, and how is that helping organizations and women organizations all over Canada, and especially in rural areas?
Thank you, MP Saray. I can say our rural MPs like yourself, like MP Hutchings, have been instrumental in shaping the Universal Broadband Fund. It is meant to connect the last mile of households that have yet to be connected to this essential service. We launched it on November 9th, and in a few days, the call will close. Because of investments we made in our first mandate, by the end of 2020, tens of thousands of households had access to the internet. By the end of this year, about 250,000 households will have that high-speed connection, but that's above and beyond what the Universal Broadband Fund will do. There's a rapid response component to the UBF, as it's affectionately known in our midst, and it is meant to support projects that can go shovels in the ground this construction season and wrap up by the end of this year. And we expect to see tens of thousands of households get connected through this. Madam Chair, let me also thank this committee for the very important work you've done on focusing on rural women. We have been applying a rural lens to the entirety of our COVID response as part of the plus in the GBA plus that has been sharpened. And that's helped us understand particularly the realities of younger and older women in rural communities. And as this committee continues its important work, I highly encourage you to take into account the importance of early learning in childcare, but particularly how difficult and how unique the needs will be in rural Canada. As you've heard the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, universal early learning and childcare is a priority for our government, and I know this committee cares what happens to rural women. We can't let the mistakes of the past be repeated. In the last recession, rural women were the last to recover from COVID, particularly those with children.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, Madame Larouche, vous avez 6.
Thank you, Madame Larouche. Now you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Minister and the other witnesses for being here with us today. these investments will help women. And you mentioned during this pandemic, Madam Minister, that women lost their jobs often because they were in the service industry, so precarious jobs. They lost their jobs because they had to make the choice to stay home and take care of their family. These are situations that we saw with the pandemic. There's also the whole matter of violence, that 10% of women were afraid of being victims of violence during the pandemic, and in Quebec, in 2 months, there were 5 women who were murdered. I say it because this number hurts, and it is unacceptable in 2021. You also talked about senior women who were isolated at home, alone, who may not have lost their jobs, but they felt the increase of prices, the lack of groceries, COVID taxes, all these costs that increase for women who did not see their buying power increase. So they had to make difficult choices by the end of the month, buying food, buying medication, lodgings. And 50 years ago, we were talking about the importance of having pay equity for women. It's so important to reach this pay equity. We are excited for women to finally see this pay equity so that the government can lead by example. These are all files that the pandemic has highlighted, but I would like to come back to credits, because for women, to support women, we will need funding. In the analysis, we see $8.7 million was not spent before the end of last year, so December 2020. So we have that credit, but why were we not able to spend that $8.7 million? The needs were there. Perhaps that Quebec could have known what to do with the transfers, especially for domestic violence cases. Thank you.
Quebecers have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, with half of the deaths due to COVID being mourned by Quebecers who are missing their loved ones.
Madame la Présidente, on n'a pas de traduction. Montez votre micro.
Please raise your microphone, Madam Minister.
Yes, forgive me. Let me try that again. Madame Larouche, I want to acknowledge that Quebecers are mourning. More than half of the deaths due to COVID in Canada have been Quebecers, and the whole country mourns with you. You're also right, Madame Larouche, in that the rates of violence have gone up and that our partnership with Quebec has been instrumental in providing supports to frontline organizations. There is $17.46 million in emergency COVID funds specifically focused on addressing gender-based violence that has gone directly to the government of Quebec, and they've deployed those dollars to the front lines. So we're doing that work. You also made mention of our elders and how they've been harmed. Increases in OAS and GIS have supported our elders. Supports for frontline organizations in the community to be able to better support them has also been part of our priority. You asked about the funding that my team has been rolling out to the front lines. Perhaps I'll ask my wonderful Deputy Minister, Guylaine Roy, to respond to that aspect of your question.
Merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Madam Minister, and thank you, Madame Larouche. I just wanted to clarify, you asked a question on the Supplementary Estimate C, and the question was why there was $8.7 million, and you're wondering if this money was spent? The answer is as follows. In the fall 2020, there was an additional $50 million. The interpreter regrets, but the feed has frozen.
The screen is frozen.
C'est vraiment dommage. J'aurais voulu avoir la réponse.
It's unfortunate because I wanted to get the answer. why 8.7 million wasn't spent. It's a technical issue. The funds were not able to be spent because we concluded our agreement with Quebec after December 31st. So we want to ensure that the 8.7 million is there for Quebec. And as the minister said, for Quebec, we're talking about $17.46 million that was sent for an emergency fund. So it's because there wasn't an agreement concluded before December 31st. Yes, it's a technical matter because the law required that we spend this money before December 31st, but the money is there for Quebec. Another thing, for the main estimates,
Now we're going to Miss Matheson for 6 minutes.
Je déplore seulement que les problèmes techniques ont...
Well, it's the technical problems that made me lose a bit of time.
And then for 6.
Thank you. Minister, in your mandate letter, going back to that, it also says the Prime Minister expects you to drive systemic change that promotes a fairer and more productive society for women by improving quality of life, advancing leadership, and addressing gender-based violence. Do you believe that it's your role as the Minister to address those systemic barriers that women face when it comes to being heard, believe, and trusted when they come forward, and say that they have been a target of gender-based violence, even if it's in our armed forces and even when it's a cabinet colleague who ignores them?
Madam Chair, it is the responsibility of every single one of us to ensure survivors are heard and that they have the supports they need when they have the courage to come forward. Absolutely, I take my responsibilities seriously, but I'm also fortunate that I'm not the only one around the table who takes that burden on. It is up to all of us. My colleague referred to the armed forces and the troubling allegations that continue to come forward. If I may, Madam Chair, let me thank every single survivor who has the courage to step up and to share her story. These silence breakers have the ability to give courage to those who are suffering in silence. And our government is determined to improve the processes so that it's not a matter of confidentiality or lack of trust in these organizations that prevents more victims from coming forward, but that we create spaces and institutions and workplaces where all women and non-binary folks can feel safe and feel like they belong.
Well, that's interesting. But in fact, when a woman did come forward and determined like she needed that confidentiality, she was not listened to. Her complaint was refused by the minister. I was hoping that you could say or tell us in your opinion, do you think that it was appropriate that the PCO asked the Ombudsman, Mr. Walburn, for the name of the complainant?
I think the characterization here, Madam Chair, is inaccurate. There was a process in place to protect the privacy and the confidentiality of victims. That process was followed, a process that we now know needs to be significantly improved. And as you've heard the Prime Minister, as you've heard the Minister of Defense, we're doing exactly that. These institutions can be stubborn in their resistance to change, but our government is committed to ensuring that all survivors feel heard and respected and that they're given the care that they're needed. And I hope that this particular individual, whose name we do not know because she didn't wish us to know, has the support and the care she needs, and all survivors who are being triggered by the nature of the allegations and the testimonies and the coverage, that they have the support they need as well.
But Minister, the reason why that complaint was not heard and that an investigation didn't happen is because the Ombudsman at the time wouldn't release her name to the PCO, and the PCO in fact demanded to know her name. So do you think that that was appropriate? Do you think that that's actually protecting victims in this instance?
It is clear, Madam Chair, that the processes in place are far from perfect. And every time a survivor comes forward, we better understand the gaps in those processes. And as you've heard every single member of our government who's been asked about this, we are committed to making this better And we are committed to ensuring that, we're all working towards a future where no one has to say me too. We're all working towards a future where no victim feels afraid of the system. We're working towards a future where survivors have trust and confidence in the system, and they feel free and open to share their names and the details so that justice can be pursued.
So what I'm hearing, I mean, ultimately the minister refused to hear any sort of complaint brought forward by Mr. Walbourne, and you say that he's followed the processes, but ultimately there are huge problems with the processes. Is your department involved in trying to rectify this, in taking the recommendations from the Deschamps report? Is your ministry and your department actively seeking change that you say is so necessary within the Department of National Defense?
Absolutely, we are. And as you know, Madam Chair, we're working on the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence, and the Department of Defense was always a strong partner in the next phase of our government's response to gender-based violence within the military. But we're expediting some of the measures, and we're also going to be working very closely with the Department of Defense whole of government approach to make sure that we improve these processes. We can do better. Women in uniform deserve better. And just look at what they're doing in long-term care homes. Look at what they're doing on the front lines of the fight against COVID and delivering vaccines. These are noble professions, and every single Canadian who joins the forces deserves to be safe and respected. And we are committed to creating the conditions to do that.
Very good. And now we will go to our second round of questions. We're going to have Ms. Shin for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Minister. I appreciate your willingness to hear questions. Minister, in the Prime Minister's mandate letter to you, he asked you to develop a national action plan on gender-based violence with a focus on ensuring that anyone facing gender-based violence has reliable and timely access to protection and services. As you know, the pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing gaps of assistance toward women. Because of lockdowns, women facing domestic violence are challenged in regards to their exit. And it's been a year since the pandemic lockdown. How are Canadian women safer today than a year ago? And on that note, how are Indigenous women and girls safer today than a year ago? You haven't released an action plan in response to the report. And when I asked you this question, that was July last year in the committee. How are they safer today? What are the process that you're in right now in response to that? In addition to this list of questions here, I think it would be very, my concern right now is the culture of gaslighting women that I'm not very happy with. I know that we want to counter that, but when you have the Minister of Defense abdicating and the government covering up for that, to me, that is just treating the trauma of these women as just invisible. You can say all the nice things and show solidarity through words, but if there's no action, and then we have these hotel quarantine situations where with the sexual assaults, I mean, it's not a safe place right now, and it needs to be safer. Can the minister commit to these points and share with us today what has actually been done to make Canada a safer place for women a year after the lockdown? Thank you.
Thank you very much, MP Shin. I share your frustration, and I want to assure you that in the past 5 years, more has been done to create greater safety and supports for Canadian women than I would say in decades. Probably not since the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Because of just my own government department, not the whole of government, but just my own, 6 million Canadians receive supports and care.
Minister, I'd like to interject because I've heard that answer before, and I appreciate your sensibility to those other areas. But the reality is women are being traumatized, they're being raped, and it's not being really dealt with. And even if you look at the rural broadband lack of support there, counseling is online. These women in the rural areas can't even access counseling. These are traumatized women. So I'd like to challenge you as woman to woman. How can you help these women who are the most vulnerable, who are being physically violated, sexually violated, to get the support they need. And I think you would agree with me that it's very important that they do find this.
I do. And I think that the close to 2,000 organizations we have funded in rural communities and Indigenous communities and urban centers for racialized women, for Indigenous women, for Black women, for those with disabilities, that these organizations have been a lifeline. And just during COVID, I can say that close to 1 million women and children in their hour of need have been able to find support. That support was there for them because our government reached out to our partners across the country. They told us, give us funding and we'll take care of those who need our help. And we did. And we trusted them with those
Minister,
funds.
I would like to ask, will you then ask your colleagues to shut down this debacle with the hotel quarantine situation? Because not one more woman should have to risk being afraid going there to be assaulted. Like, can you commit to that? Because all those things really add up to nothing if it's in your power to do something about this situation right now.
I would say that for about 1 million women and children who have received supports because of our government's investment in frontline organizations, that support has been more than nothing. It has been a lifeline. As someone who has stayed in one of those places in her hour of need, I can assure you that it's made a world of difference.
I know it's made a difference, but if these women continue to face the fear of sexual assault and actually experience it, and you have a defense minister who keeps covering up and the prime minister keeps covering up, this is not good for our country. And I really, really wish, and I will pray that you will continue to receive the wisdom to deal with this so that we all feel safe.
And Pishin, there is no cover up. If anything, we're out there talking openly about the processes that need to be improved. We're out there sharing data about the increases in gender-based violence. We're working on a national action plan on gender-based violence, which can only move forward with provinces and territories. And
it's been a year since the lockdown, and women, I don't think, are safer if we're reading these things on the headlines.
I'm sorry, that's your time. Now we're going to Ms. Sidhu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming here today, and thank you all the officials for being here with us today. Minister, you're championing feminist recovery at the cabinet table with initiatives such as the Feminist Response and Recovery Fund. Recently, Canada was recognized by CARE International as having the most gender-responsive plan to address COVID-19. Kudos to you and your team. Minister, this week you have hosted the Canada Feminist Response and Recovery Summit session with experts from across Canada, including women witnesses who already appeared at our committee. An interesting session I have attended was on the topic of care economy. Minister Monsef, can you please elaborate on what you are hearing from experts? Can you provide us update on how we are supporting our carers, particularly our marginalized women providing care for Canadians?
Thank you very much, MP Sidhu, and congratulations on the vote in the House of Commons yesterday on your private members bill on a framework for diabetes. I know you've been working on that since day one of being a member of Parliament, and your constituents are very smart to have sent you to Ottawa. That work is going to make a big difference. You're right, the summit included many sessions, including one on women in the care economy. These are women who are working as early learning and childcare workers. They're personal support workers. They're looking after those with disabilities and exceptionalities in group homes, for example. They're the reason, it turns out, that our entire economy is built on care at its core, and these women have been doing the heavy lifting. And P. City, you being from Brampton, you also know that COVID has disproportionately asked more of racialized women than others. And we saw yesterday in the stats that those women, racialized women, have died more due to COVID than others. What this means for us moving forward on long-term care homes, it means having standards, it means respecting and valuing the work that is typically done by women. What it means in the meantime, our government has supported provinces and territories with some $3 billion for quote unquote pandemic pay, the wage top up for those care workers who are essential to our ability to fight COVID. I think one of the conversations that our society is reckoning with, as MP Shin and others said, aside from gender-based violence and the culture that, it creates the conditions for too many women being vulnerable, the other conversation we need to have is about the true value of care work in our society. If so many women are doing so much unpaid work, if so many women are staying home because they don't have access to quality care, our economy is not going to come roaring back. And the opportunity here, aside from better respecting care workers and ensuring that there are frameworks in places and standards in place so that long-term care homes are safer for staff and residents, is the need for universal early learning and childcare, because without it, we'll stay in a much less than ideal performing economy, and Canadians can do better. We saw with Quebec, there's a model that works, that gets women back to work, that helps the economy get more productive, and that's certainly an exciting opportunity for women and for our government to pursue with provinces and territories, of course.
Thank you. Throughout this year, the shadow pandemic has been a common point of concern and discussion. In my area, Peel Regional Police have seen an increase in the number of calls they're getting to respond to issues of domestic and gender-based violence over this pandemic. Early on, the Prime Minister and you announced $50 million in support to organizations serving women and their families who are fleeing violence, and later this past fall announced an additional $50 million fund. Minister, can you update us on how much the $100 million in COVID-19 relief funding has gone to organizations? How many organizations will receive?
In 20 seconds.
Yes, not including Quebec, over 1,000. We've changed some of the contribution agreements with existing organizations that we had agreements with so that they'd have more flexibility. With Quebec, with the first installment, about 200 were supported. With the next installment, we expect at least another 200.
All right, and that's your time. Madame LaRouche, je vais ajouter...
Ms. LaRouche, I will add 30 seconds because of the technical difficulties we had last time. You have 3 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So the question that I asked the Minister in my first round of questioning, because I'm trying to analyze the budget, because in the main estimates, another thing that we see is the amount given in 2021-2022 will be even lower than that was granted last year. That's before the supplementary estimates. Do we really think at the department that the recovery will require fewer funds than last time? And how will these funds be distributed in Quebec and in other provinces? Because we know that in Quebec and the provinces, they're already managing programs, so they need transfers. So how will the transfer of the funds be carried out? Because we all saw it. You talked about a national action plan to end violence. You said also that there's something else for women. Do we have dates? Do we have examples of measures? Are there measures that could have prevented assault that we saw in the army and also in quarantine situations?
To answer, our agreement with Quebec is working well. We were happy to hear finally that it's ready to be signed and that organizations can receive funds for the next phase of installments. Quebec has said that it will act as an observer in the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence for the time being. Guylaine, perhaps you'd like to add a little more to that.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. J'aimerais...
Thank you, Madame Minister. If I may, I would like to answer Ms. LaRouche's question with regard to the main estimates and a comparison of the 2 years and why there was a decrease If you compare the main estimates from one year to the next, the reason why there was a decrease of 4.3 million, that was mainly due to the commemoration fund for the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and that fund expired in 2021, and that's why there were $4.3 million less in the second year. And with regard to agreements with Quebec, we have agreements on emergency funding with Quebec, which distributes the money.
We're going to Ms. Matheson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot of talk from your government about the delivery of a national childcare system. But in all of the talk, all of the speeches and throne speeches and so on, a lot of the numbers fall short of what's actually necessary. The key stakeholders within childcare have asked for an immediate $2.5 billion, which actually your government agreed to do in a unanimous consent motion in the House, but have failed to do so yet. They are also asking for $10 billion over the next 5 years. They've also requested a piece of legislation to put forward a Universal Child Care Act. We also heard in previous testimony on Tuesday from witnesses that this will only continue to create a piecemeal approach in terms of childcare. So will we be able to see that full funding in the upcoming budget?
Madam Chair, I too look forward to the upcoming budget, the first to be tabled in the House of Commons by a woman finance minister. I would say that the $450 million set aside for skills training and the workforce development on early learning and childcare workers is a significant first step in building a system that provides that quality, affordable, accessible care. Building a secretariat within the Government of Canada, as you can appreciate, this has been mostly done within our provincial and territorial jurisdictions. That secretariat is going to create the capacity for the federal government to do its part. We already have created more than 40,000 childcare spaces in Canada. And when the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister say we've got our nose to the grindstone on this one, those are words I take seriously, because never before have we seen the private sector and governments and Canadians on board with the idea of universal early learning and childcare.
But one of the key things is that all of that money, which it is a first step, but it still falls short and it doesn't get the job done. Are you willing to do what it takes to get the job done and provide the full funding being asked for by key stakeholders in the childcare sector?
We're working very closely with them, MP Matheson, and there is about 15,000 childcare workers that we are short of in Canada right now, and we can't build a system without the mostly women who look after our kids. So that's a priority. And Minister Hussein has also held a federal, provincial, territorial meeting with his counterparts. I was fortunate to be there, and province.
I'm sorry, that's your time. Now we're going to go to Ms. Sahota for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I'm going to build on what my colleague MP Shin had asked you. So I'm going to give you some statistics. 1 in 3 women and girls in Canada will face some sort of gender-based violence in their lifetime. That is 6,373,323 women and girls. Minister, I asked you at your last appearance here at the committee when you appeared for main estimates, and you refused to answer my question when we would see the National Action Plan to address gender-based violence. And our allies such as Australia, Belgium, Finland, France, Norway, and the United Kingdom have all developed national action plans, and in some cases already working on version 2 and 3. So you've been giving a lot of fluffy answers, but fluffy answers don't solve the problems. Actions do, and we do not have a national action plan from you. So you're sitting here and telling us you're protecting women, you're defending women, you're standing up for women, and yet there's no action plan. Can you tell me when that action plan is coming and how, by not having that, you're protecting women and you're standing up for women?
Madam Chair, our federal strategy to address and prevent gender-based violence was the first of its kind. So Canada is moving to phase 2 of its plan to address and prevent gender-based violence with a national action plan. The last time I was here, I shared with this committee that we have to speak with our federal, with our provincial and territorial counterparts. We did that, and we are moving forward. I encourage my colleague to look at the record of decision that came from that meeting. Lastly, Madam Chair, when we put forward that federal strategy on gender-based violence, the Conservative Party of Canada voted against it. I am hopeful that this time the Conservative Party of Canada will support our measures to ensure that every woman is safe.
You didn't answer my question, but I'm going to go on to the next one, hoping you will answer that. Minister, with the explosive revelations of rampant sexual misconducts in the highest ranks of our military, how many conversations have you had with the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister about how this government is failing women who choose to serve in uniform for their country? What specific recommendations have you made?
Madam Chair, I thought I answered the previous question in a lot of detail. If my colleague would like more information, I'm happy to provide it. I can assure her too that I'm in regular conversation with my colleagues about the need to improve processes and the culture within these institutions so that all women can feel safe and feel like they belong.
Have you read the committee report from June 2019, A Force for Change, Creating a Culture of Equality for Women in the Canadian Armed Forces, and looked at the recommendations we made to the government?
Yes, we've been very fortunate that FEWO undertook that study. We appreciated it in June, and certainly we've been reviewing it further.
So following instructions from you and your deputy, Ms. Roy, at your last FEWO appearance, we've had other PBO and we've had both the PBO and Minister Tassi, the lead for gender equity pay testimony. The PBO felt that your government could have implemented pay equity sooner than your current pace, and the minister objected to that statement when questioned. The question is, Minister, how can your government be trusted to stand up for women in any capacity when your colleagues and the PBO aren't even on the same page? I would also do you the favor of reminding you that the Harper government has not been in power for over 6 years.
Unfortunately, that's your time.
Madam Chair, may I provide a quick response to that?
A very brief response.
The Conservative Party of Canada voted against our pay equity legislation.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Ms. Saeed for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for appearing before the committee today, and thank you for all the work which you are doing on behalf of all women. Really appreciate having your voice on the cabinet table. This year of 2020, last 12 months have been difficult for everyone across the world, for all Canadians, but particularly women. They have felt the impacts of the COVID-19 and their lives have been affected adversely. They have been caregivers for their parents. They have been teachers for their children, trying to make their ends meet. Minister, can you please discuss the number of measures that our government has taken to support Canadians, especially women, through this health crisis as we work towards recovery? Particularly if you can discuss why the Women in the Economy Task Force is such a crucial piece.
Thank you so much, MP Zahid, and particularly for your leadership as Chair for Immigration and Citizenship Committee. That work is so important to our government and to our country's economic prosperity, and we appreciate having you at the table. In terms of the measures that have been implemented, the CERB, the wage subsidy, the CEBA loans, the women entrepreneurship funds, the changes in EI that have actually brought the number of women receiving EI close to 50% for the first time ever. The GBV funds that we were discussing, the supports given to increase pay for those on the front lines of the fight against the pandemic. Vaccines, my goodness, there are 4 vaccines now, and those vaccines are going to help women who are caring and afraid for their loved ones and help them get back to work. In addition to the $1.5 billion that Minister Qualtrough announced, the funds will go to provinces and territories, have already gone to provinces and territories to support skills training for women in those hardest hit sectors. Those are some of the measures that our government's put forward. In addition to collecting disaggregated gendered data, these are going to be important pieces, foundational pieces to get our economy back. The Women in the Economy Task Force that Minister Phelan and Minister Fortier announced is made up of a group of women who bring a breadth of experiences to the decision-making table. Their voices are going to inform our government, particularly the ministers responsible in finance, to ensure that our recovery has the most practical and the most comprehensive understanding of how women are landing in the midst of the pandemic, but also how do we get women back on their feet? How do we get women into those early learning and childcare spaces? Those women are needed there. So perhaps we can train the women who've been hit in the hospitality sector and lost their jobs to become ELCC workers. But beyond that, we need to get more women into STEM fields, in trades, in engineering, in math, in science, and those fields are higher wage fields and they have significant labor shortages. So as for all the ways that women have been hit hard by COVID, Madam Chair, there are incredible opportunities ahead of us for women and for all Canadians. And with a feminist government in charge who's listening to the voices of diverse women, women are going to be okay. But it requires all of us to work together and to first and foremost beat the virus and ensure everyone who wants one get the vaccine.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Minister, very much for appearing with our committee today. As you know, there are several routine motions that we go through to approve the supplementary and main estimates, and so I'll read those out now. Shall vote 5C in the amount of $8,700,000 under the Department for Women and Gender Equality carry? All in favor? Opposed? All right. Shall I report the supplementary estimates from 2020 and 2021 to the House? All in favor? Opposed? Very good. And for the main estimates, shall vote 1 in the amount of $45,345,445 under the Department for Women and Gender Equality.
Can we get a reported division on this, please?
Yes, we may. So the question again, shall vote 1 in the amount of $45,345,445 under the Department for Women and Gender Equality carry? And clerk, if you would take the vote on that.
Ms. Dillon. Oh, sorry, Ms. Shanahan.
Yay.
Ms. Hutchins.
Yay.
Monsieur Sarré.
Oui.
Ms. Sidhu.
Yes.
Ms. Zaid.
Yes.
Ms. Sahota.
Yes.
Ms. Shin.
Yes.
Ms. Wong.
Yes.
Madame Larouche.
Oui.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
And
10 yeas.
it's approved. Then shall vote 5 in the amount of $75,544,000.22 under the Department for Women and Gender Equality carry? Ms. Sahota.
Can we do a recorded division, please?
Yes, indeed.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes.
Ms. Hutchins.
Yes.
Monsieur Sarré.
Oui.
Ms. Sidhu,
Yes.
Ms. Zaid,
Yes.
Ms. Sahota,
Yes.
Ms. Shin,
Yes.
Ms. Wong,
Yes.
Madame Larouche,
Oui.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
10 yeas.
Excellent. And so then I think the last one is, shall I report the main estimates 2021-22 to the House? All in favor? Ms. Sahota?
Recorder division, please.
Absolutely. Clerk?
Ms. Shanahan,
Yes.
Ms. Hutchins,
Yes.
Monsieur Sarré,
Oui.
Ms. Sidhu,
Yes.
Ms. Zaid,
Yes.
Ms. Sahota,
Yes.
Ms. Shin,
Yes.
Ms. Wong,
Yes.
Madame Larouche,
Oui.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
10 yeas.
Thank you. That's passed. So then we are going to go into our committee portion of the meeting. So you'll have to log off this link and log into the in-camera portion, and I'll see you on the other side. We're suspending until then.
you.